go ahead and start doing that. Awesome. So the purpose of today's briefing, as I was saying, is to give you a recap on the events that we've put on so far, also share some of the legislative and budget advocacy that Hope has been working on for the past couple of months, and share what opportunities there are for you all to kind of stay engaged, especially if you joined us at Latina Action Day and you were able to advocate on behalf of some of these bills. We just wanted to share an update on where they're at and how helpful your efforts were in getting the bills to their kind of next stage in the legislative process. Hope has also conducted a series of reports, so we will be sharing a little bit about those findings, mainly for our 2024 Economic Status of Latinas report. And then at the end, I will kick it over to Belinda to share a little bit about two upcoming events that we have that we hope that you can join us at. So I think for the most part, most of the folks on the call are familiar with Hope, but for those who are not and found us on our, found out about this briefing on our social media or from a friend, I just wanted to give an overview of what we do. So Hope stands for Hispanas Organized for Political Equality. So we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization that is committed to ensuring political and economic parity for Latinas through leadership, advocacy, and education to benefit all communities and the status of women. So we do that kind of in these three buckets that are outlined here. We have a series of leadership programs. Like I mentioned at the beginning, if you are an alumna of our program, please feel free to drop it in the chat. We have a series of programs that are tailored at different audiences. We have our youth leadership program for our high school women, a college leadership program, which recently launched and is virtual, and also includes, is nationwide. We have young leaders from across the country. We have our Signature Hope Leadership Institute, which I think most of you are familiar with. And then we have a binational fellowship, which we also recently announced the 2024 cohort for, and they had just wrapped up their first session in Washington, D.C. In addition to all of our leadership programs, Hope also puts on a series of educational events and programming throughout the year. We have Latina History Day, which is in Los Angeles, which is one of our bigger events that we host. Latina Action Day, which I hope many of you were able to join us for in Sacramento. We have our Latina Empowerment Days, which Belinda will talk about at the end of the presentation, and those are statewide. Our anniversary dinner, our Young Professional Summit, if you're a college student, keep an eye on that, because that's tailored specifically for our young adults. And we have virtual programming that we're going to be hosting throughout the year. And in addition to all of our programming, Hope also shares data on the Latina experience and advocates for policy changes that champion equity reforms for Latinas. So some of our reports include the 2024 Economic Status of Latinas report, which I'll be talking about, our gubernatorial appointments report from 2023, our 2023 Status of Latina Electeds report, and we actually just launched a couple of days ago our Status of Latina Electeds in New York report, which I will give a brief snippet on. But this is just a little bit about who we are, what we do, and hopefully by the end of the briefing, you'll have a maybe more concrete understanding of what all of these buckets look like in practice. So for our first kind of recap, Hope hosted our 33rd annual Latina History Day in March of this year. Thank you to everyone who was able to join us. If you joined us and you enjoyed it, please feel free to drop in the chat what was a memorable experience for you there. We had over 1,200 women from across California and across all generations join us for this event at the JW Marriott at LA Live in March. We had a great lineup of speakers, over 40 panelists that shared their wisdom across topics like education, career empowerment, identity. We also hosted over 50 Latina small businesses as part of our Comadre network to really give them a platform to be able to share their work. And it was just a celebration of all of, Latina history and achievements. And it was an opportunity for us to bring the community together. If you were able to join us this year, hopefully you can join us next year. You can save the date. It's going to be on March 7th, 2025. So hopefully if you're in LA, you'll be able to join us for that next year. And if you're not in LA, you can hopefully make it down to join us. The other event that we hosted this year was Latina Action Day in Sacramento. So Latina Action Day is our signature kind of Latina policy and advocacy conference, and that was hosted in May. We had over 430 Latina leaders and college students from across California join us for a day of advocacy. We hosted a workshop on education, on health access, on the wage gap and how we can build economic parity. And all of our participants were also able to then go to the Capitol and advocate on behalf of legislation. Do want to give a really big shout out to all of the folks in the room who were able to join us for Latina Action Day and advocate for the bills that are in our legislative package. Thanks to all of our attendees, we were able to visit over 90 legislative offices and talk to them about issues that impact Latinas and our policy. So hopefully if you joined us last year or this year, you can join us next year. You can save the date, which is going to be on May 6th, 2025. So around similar time as this year. Awesome. So I know I just mentioned Latina Action Day, and I mentioned that some of our attendees were able to advocate on behalf of our legislation at Latina Action Day. And so we had, as part of our legislative package, 5 bills that we advocated for. 2 are Hope sponsored, meaning that these are bills that Hope is actively working on, negotiating amendments with, moving and ushering through the legislative process. And then we have 3 other bills that are part of our larger strong support category that we're taking, that we've been able to usher through. So for our LAD attendees in the room, I just wanted to give an update and thank you for your advocacy, because I think when you were all advocating for these bills, they were at a kind of pivotal point where they were going to be either heard in committee, or we're going to be voted off of the first house and sent over to the second one. So this is kind of an update on where they are. So our first bill is SB 782, authored by Senator Limon, which I will actually go into depth on in the next couple of slides. But this is our transparency and gubernatorial appointments report, which would require the governor's office to annually report the demographic information that they currently collect on gubernatorial appointees. So we're happy to share that the bill has passed out of the relevant policy committees in the Assembly. So it was referred to the Assembly Governmental Organization and the Assembly Judiciary Committee, and it got unanimous support. And now it is in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. Our next sponsored bill is AB 1780 by Assemblymember Phil Ting, and this is part of our higher education portfolio. And this bill would ban legacy admission practices at private institutions across the state. And it is currently set for a hearing in the Senate Education Committee next week, and it's also going to be sent over to the Senate Judiciary Committee. So I will also go into depth a little bit more about that one in the next slide. The other bill that is also part of our higher education equity portfolio is AB 359 by Assemblymember Holden. And this bill is trying to reform the College and Career Access Pathways Dual Enrollment Program, which is a program that is focused on improving access to dual enrollment, which is a program that allows high school students to take community college courses while they're still in high school. What we know is that dual enrollment is a strategy that really supports college access, especially for students who are underrepresented in higher education. But there are current issues to participation that limit the knowledge about dual enrollment, the ability of a high school to partner with the community college. And also there are kind of systemic barriers, even if a student is interested, in terms of ensuring that the courses that they are taking are going to count towards their college courses credit and also their high school graduation requirements. And so this bill is reforming all of that to make it easier and more beneficial for students to participate in CCAP, which is this program. We're happy to share that it has passed out of the Senate Education Committee and it is currently in the Senate Appropriations Committee. So for all of you that advocated for this, our HLI current cohort also conducted a series of meetings on AB 359. So thank you. Your help was really essential in getting it to the Senate Appropriations Committee. And then the last two bills are part of our kind of health equity and access portfolio. And so it's AB 3161 by Assemblymember Mia Bonta, which is our Equity and Healthcare Act. So this bill, what it does is it requires hospitals, when they are reporting adverse health events. So let's say that a patient dies, or there's a case of where harm is kind of caused to the patient, or there's malpractice. They're currently required to report that to the California Department of Public Health, but they are not required to report the sociodemographic factors of the patients that were involved in those what are called adverse health events. And so what this bill does is it requires that all of that reporting include the sociodemographic factors in aggregate of the patients. And it's a way for us to be able to better assess the correlation between these events and also what racial equity gaps exist, especially for communities of color, which we know are impacted the most by cases like issues like racial bias. And so this bill was passed out of the Senate Health Committee, and it is currently in the Senate Appropriations Committee. Our last bill that is part of our kind of legislative package is AB 2319, which is joint authored by Assemblymember Lori Wilson and Assemblymember Akila Weber. And this bill is trying to create a stronger enforcement mechanism for the California Dignity in Pregnancy and Childbirth Act. So back in 2019, the state of California passed legislation that was landmark in terms of creating requirements for implicit bias training so that we would be able to tackle the high rates of maternal mortality for communities of color. But what we've seen since 2019 is that a lot of folks, a lot of this like rate of maternal mortality is still pretty high. And the Attorney General's office did an investigation and found that it's because a lot of hospitals don't really have clarity on who is supposed to be trained, what that training is supposed to look like. And there wasn't really a strong enforcement mechanism on that 2019 law. And so what AB 2319 does is it creates that strong enforcement mechanism so we can make sure we are ensuring fidelity to the original vision of how we're closing these maternal mortality gaps. So these are all of the bills that we are taking a really strong support position on. You can learn more about them at our website. I know Leslie is dropping links in the chat. You can access the bill text, the bill fact sheets, the status of where they are, all on there, because I know this is a very quick crash course on our bills. So for our sponsored legislation, I did want to go a little bit deeper into them just so that you all kind of get a sense of what opportunities there are for you to continue to be engaged with us on our work. So SB 782 is the bill that I mentioned earlier, which is the first of our two sponsored bills. And this bill, again, requires the governor's office to annually report the demographic information of their appointees. Now, this is a bill that Hope has been partnering with Senator Limon on for the past almost 4 years now. We have run the bill a series of times. It has gotten support in the legislature, but unfortunately has been vetoed for a whole bunch of kind of different reasons. This version of the bill, I think, is our kind of strongest iteration to be able to really capture our intent, which is to increase just transparency and establish a legacy of accountability to make sure that our communities are going to have a fair representation at the decision-making table. We're really excited that this year we've been partnering with the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. They're a co-sponsor of the legislation, and they've been a really great partner with us on this. We also this year launched a gubernatorial appointments report. So to kind of almost create a demonstration project of what this kind of reporting would look like in practice, Hope looked at all of the gubernatorial appointments, from 2023, and released a report that was tracking, what were the representation gaps and what was the progress that was made. What we found is that the governor's office actually was able to achieve gender parity in appointments, but there were still gaps in terms of the, parity comparisons between Latinas and the general population. Our API community also had representation gaps. And so what we know is that we can always go farther, right? Even if we are making progress, there's always more that we can do to ensure that our communities have a voice at the table. And so that was kind of our intent with this report. It was featured on Cal Matters, on the San Francisco Chronicle, KCRA, La Opinion. I know Leslie's dropping a link in the chat if you're interested in seeing more about our report. But we've been really excited that this has kind of helped us build a little bit of traction just to show why this is an issue that is important to us, but also is important to every community. I think to that point, we're excited to share that this year our bill has been a legislative priority for three different ethnic caucuses. So the Latino caucus, the Women's Caucus, and the API Legislative Caucus have all made SB 782 a legislative priority for them, which means that they are actively advocating for the governor to sign this legislation once it gets to him. And I think it's a really good example of the case that we're trying to make, which is that representation is not just a Latina issue; it's an issue that impacts us all. And I think, being able to have partners across all of these different categories is just really exciting. Um, I think with that, I, wanted to share that there are opportunities for you to help support this work. I know many of you, if you're here on behalf of your organization, you may already be a part of our California Like Me coalition. But if this is the first time you're hearing about this bill and you're thinking to yourself like, oh, this is something interesting or something that I could see our organization supporting, we really hope that you can join our coalition. We have over 30 organizations that have signed on in support of our bill. And as part of our coalition, you will be listed on our coalition letter, which we submit to the legislature throughout the process. You'll also receive updates on the bill as it moves through the legislative process. Our policy consultant, Caro Gonzalez, has been kind of our liaison with the coalition, so you probably gotten emails from her. But we really hope that we can count on your support. We are really grateful that we've been having, really productive meetings with the administration. I think, this year the bill requires the reporting to start in 2027. So what we've been framing this as is an opportunity for the administration to establish a legacy of transparency, and a legacy of a commitment, right, to be able to show what these representation gaps are, not just for them, but for future administrations. And I think, we've been moving in a good direction. So we're hopeful that by the time it gets to the governor's desk, we'll have, hundreds of organizations fully in support and advocating alongside us for this bill. If you're here on behalf of yourself and this is something that you're interested in, you can also submit a letter to the legislature on behalf of yourself. There's a link that is going to take you 30 seconds to fill out, and it'll allow you to add your name and and basically just your zip code, and it'll send a letter directly to your legislator asking them to support this bill. Once the bill is at the governor's desk, that link will be reframed, so it's sending a letter directly to the governor. So even if you're not here on behalf of your organization, or maybe you're thinking like, I'll talk to them, but it's going to take them a while, you can also submit a letter on behalf of yourself. So we hope we can count on your support with that. I also, as a pause, I know I'm running through a lot of information. There will be an opportunity for Q&A at the very end. And feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and we'll be able to answer them throughout the process. Our other sponsored legislation, as I mentioned, is AB 1780, which is ending the practice of legacy admissions in the state. We've been partnering with a couple of other organizations that are, focused on higher education advocacy. This includes the Campaign for College Opportunity, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, the College for All Coalition, which Hope is a part of, U Aspire, and Generation Up. We also have had a series of organizations submit letters of support, so we're really grateful for that. But the whole premise of this bill really is to ensure that we have fair and equitable admission practices in the state, and what the bill, the bill is not saying that if you are a legacy student, so if you have a parent or a family member that went to a university, it's not saying you're not going to be admitted. It just means that, you're not, the reviewers are not going to look at that when they are considering who is going to get a priority if you have two equal candidates right in front of you. What we know is that the majority of Latinas and the majority of Latinx students are first gen, are low income. They don't have the same social and wealth capital that, legacy and donor affiliated students have. And so we know that this practice is inequitable. And so what this bill is really trying to do is make it so that regardless of who your parents are, whether or not they donate to an institution, you have a fair chance of going to whatever university you want to go to. The bill itself is double referred to the Senate Education and the Senate Judiciary Committees, and it has its first hearing next Wednesday at 9 a.m. in the Senate Education Committee. So if you're in Sacramento and you're interested in testifying or just, going to committee and saying, I am in support of this bill, please feel free to email me. We're always looking for people to join our coalition of support on behalf of your organization. If you're interested in taking a position on this, please feel free to email me at mmorales@latinas.org, and we'll collect your logo so we can make sure that we include you in our support letters. But those are our two sponsored legislation, and I know Leslie is dropping in the chat, the link to our legislative priorities website, and so you can learn more about all of our bills as well as access these links to take a position, join our coalition, all of that stuff on the website. In addition to all of our legislative advocacy, Hope also has been advocating for protected funding in the state budget towards higher education, financial aid reform, and also towards pretty vital Latina research. So for those who are maybe unfamiliar with the legislative process, there are kind of two avenues for change in the state. One is through our legislative advocacy, so you can champion a bill to change a law. The other thing that you can do is look at how the state is investing its money, right? We say a lot that the budget is a reflection of our values, but those investments also fund a lot of change because a lot of these bills cost money, right? And so Hope also tracks the budget process. The governor in January released his kind of first proposal. In May, he released another proposal that was kind of taking into consideration feedback from advocates, and that's known as the May Revise. On our website, Hope has a response to both the January budget and the May Revise, and it kind of will walk through for you every single kind of change that's being done. And the framing is like, how are these budget changes impacting Latinas in the state? And so you'll be able to track it because the budget is pretty hefty. So we're trying to make it as easy for you as possible to get information and stay engaged. On that note, the two biggest kind of priorities that we've had as part of our budget advocacy is Cal Grant reform funding. So if you were at Latina Action Day, you likely joined us in advocating for this budget ask. And so Cal Grant reform is a proposal that is trying to reform the state's financial aid system called Cal Grant, which is provided to low-income students across California. So right now, if you're pursuing college and you are low income, you can qualify for Cal Grant, but the amount that you receive is dependent on certain qualifying factors. So, what's your time since you graduated college? How long did it take you to graduate? What's your GPA? And so we know that, students, especially low income and underrepresented students, come from all walks of life. And these qualifying factors are not helpful in terms of actually getting money to the people that needs it. And so in 2022, the legislature agreed that they were going to change the Cal Grant system to make it simpler. So it's going to be Cal Grant 2 if you went to a community college, and then Cal Grant 4 if you went to a four-year university. And this way, we know that students would just know with confidence that they were going to get money based on what path they pursued and not based on what their unique college experience has been. We know that the simplified structure would increase access to over 130,000 students across the state, of the which over 65% are Latinx and over 50% are women, and over 65% are first generation students. So this is a really big equity issue for us. If you advocated at Latina Action Day, I'm excited to share that the legislature has made Cal Grant reform funding a priority. It was included in their joint legislative budget proposal that they voted on just yesterday, meaning that the Assembly and the Senate both agree that we need to kind of move in some direction to make this commitment to restructuring our financial aid system a reality. Negotiations are going to be happening this weekend. So the legislature is in agreement. Now they have to get the governor to agree, and once both the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor agree, then they will land on a final budget. So there are still opportunities for you to engage on this if this is something that resonates with you. I know Leslie's going to drop in the chat a link similar to the one that we have for SB 782, where you can just put your name and where you're from and whatever you'd like to add, and it'll immediately send a letter to the governor, basically saying, "Hey, agree with what the legislature is doing. This is going to help people like me across the state." So we hope we can count on your support just to get this across the finish line. But really excited that we were able to secure this in the legislature's budget proposal, which is a huge win. The other thing that we've been advocating for in our budget advocacy has been protection for the Latina Futures 2050 Lab, which is kind of a research focused entity that is focusing specifically on Latinas. It is spearheaded by the Chicano Studies Research Center in partnership with the Latino Policy and Politics Institute. So back in 2022, the legislature agreed that we really needed to look at creating a really deep database to look at how Latinas were doing in the state. What we know is Latinas are over 40% of women across California. We make up 20% of the population. So we're a huge plurality of women, and we do need to be able to develop data-informed strategies to be able to close some of our equity gaps. And I know I'll talk about the ESLR, and I'll give you an example of some of those gaps. But the Latina Futures Lab is a really big step to be able to help us develop those tools. As a part of the governor's May revise, they had suggested cutting some of that funding. And it was not just for the Latina Futures Lab, it also included the UCLA Labor Center and a couple of other entities. And so Hope has been pretty vocal about protecting this funding just because we know the impact that it'll have on our community. I'm excited to share that funding protecting that funding was also included in the joint legislative budget proposal, which is a huge win. So we're hopeful that the governor will get on board with what the legislature is advocating for. And we're also really grateful to have really strong champions in the legislature to be able to advocate on behalf of this, including one of our HLI alumna, Assemblywoman Wendy Carrillo, who's been super vocal about this, as well as the Latino Caucus and Senate Majority Leader Lina Gonzalez, and Assemblywoman Sabrina Cervantes, who have been really strong advocates for making sure that this funding is protected in the budget. And as I mentioned, these are just two things that Hope has been working on pretty strongly in terms of our budget work. But if you're interested in learning more about the budget, what cuts are being proposed to, say, a topic that interests you, like healthcare, education, workforce, small businesses, you can take a look at our website. And we have a response to the May revise, which I think goes into detail about all of the changes. So hopefully you can get informed a little bit more about that. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me, and I'm happy to walk you through it. So in addition to all of our events, in addition to all of our legislative work, in addition to our budget advocacy, as I mentioned earlier, Hope also has been curating a lot of really interesting research that is focusing on uplifting the Latina experience in California. Our biggest kind of labor of love, as I'd call it, was our 2024 Economic Status of Latinas report, which was launched in May of this year, right before Latina Action Day. Really excited to share that our Economic Status of Latinas report was also featured in the Assembly Select Committee on Latina Inequities, which is chaired by Assemblywoman Wendy Carrillo. And you can access at our website the link both to the report and also to the hearing, which was super interesting. We brought a whole bunch of Latina leaders in partnership with the California Women's Commission. As you'll see in this picture, I actually don't know if she's on, but Dr. Rita Gallardo-Good on behalf of the Commission on Women and Girls, Sonia Diaz from the Latina Futures Lab. You'll also see our executive director, Helen Torres, and the lead author of our report, which is Dr. Elsa Macias, as well as some of our other partners, including some from the Gender Equity and Policy Institute from GEPI, who were able to join us to talk about what are the strategies that we can create to ensure economic parity for women. And there was a panel specifically focused on the wage gap, which we know Latinas have one of the largest wage gaps in the state. So if you're interested in that, I really encourage you to look at the recording. I also want to take advantage to share some of the findings for our Economic Status of Latinas report, which is almost like a literature review of sorts that really captures the point in time. So how are Latinas doing in 2024 across factors like education, leadership, healthcare access, And we compare them to their white counterparts to be able to really assess what those racial equity gaps are. So one of the things that we always mention is that California has the largest Latino population in the nation, and Latinos comprise one of the largest demographic groups of the state's population at just over 40%. And this is for Latinos generally. Um, Although the state experienced an overall decline in its population between 2020 and 2022, the Hispanic population remained essentially steady. And as the state's population is reporting growth again this year, we expect that its Hispanic population will also increase proportionally. As I've mentioned, Latinas make up nearly 20% of the state's population and 40% of all women. So what this means is that 1 in every 5 people in California is a Latina. Um, we know that in areas such as the Inland Empire, Fresno, Bakersfield, and Merced, Latinas are well over 25% of the total population and over half of all women. And so you can kind of see here on the chart some of these demographic factors. I know I've been mentioning the wage gap as being a feature of the hearing, but we really want to highlight it because it's like every time I see this data, I always get so angry and just disappointed in how much work we still need to do to make sure that we're achieving parity here. So on the left side of this graph, we can see that the average white non-Hispanic woman in California working full-time year-round earned 81 cents for every dollar earned by a white man in 2022, while Latinas faced an even wider gap at 57 cents. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Latinas earned only 45 cents for every dollar earned by a white man. If we include all women with earnings, which is what's on the right side of this chart, meaning women working part-time or seasonally, the wage gap widens, meaning that Latinas earn only 42 cents, while white women drop even more to 71 cents. And so what this wage gap translates to is that women would have to work longer than men and live on less in retirement because of the wages lost due to this wage gap. What we also see here is that there are still stark disparities in terms of the median household income and wealth. In 2022, Hispanic households earned $75,000 annually on average, and white non-Hispanic households earned $103,000 annually on average. We also combine that if you look at equity in home ownership and retirement accounts. What that translates to is that the typical white household holds 9 times the wealth of a typical Latino household. So there are very stark disparities, not just for Latinas, but across even our own community in terms of income and wealth disparities that still need to be addressed. In educational attainment, Latina educational attainment continues to improve despite many challenges. 2 examples are here on this chart. Although the 2023 Latina high school graduation rate dropped from 88% the previous year to 87%, it still exceeded the state overall graduation rate of 86% and narrowed the gap with white women. The graduation rate for Latina English learners, however, was significantly lower. And you can see that in this kind of darker blue chart, that there are still even disparities between the larger Latina subgroup, that there are some students who even face bigger barriers in accessing education. When we look at college degree attainment, we know that Latinas with at least a bachelor's degree are at 18.3%, and these are Latinas 25 and older. However, when we compare that to white women at least 25 and older with at least a bachelor's degree are at 47.8%. So there's a huge disparity just in terms of degree attainment. So clearly there's a lot of work that needs to be done, not just in closing equity gaps through our K through 12 education system, but also supporting our Latinas access college and graduate and, get into the pipeline of pursuing whatever career they are interested in pursuing. The last kind of tidbit of information I'll share from the data from our ESLR is looking at the status of Latinas leading. As I mentioned, we kind of highlighted some of our gubernatorial appointment data. From 2023, we found that only 9% of gubernatorial appointments just in 2023 were Latina. And we see that representation, when we look at the corporate side, is even more abysmal. because they're only at 3.3%. So part of our mission of achieving political parity is also ensuring that Latinas are at decision-making tables. And so these percentages kind of show us a little bit of where we're at and where we need to be to make sure that we achieve that. The ESLR also includes a series of policy recommendations to close a lot of these gaps across different topics like financial literacy, wage inequality, closing our educational outcome gaps. We also focus on how we can support Latina small business owners. We have data recommendations on how to improve college access and affordability, as well as how we can improve leadership and representation to make sure that we're accounting for some of those percentages that I showed in the previous slide. So I'd really encourage you, if you are here on behalf of yourself and you're just curious about learning more about our research, please read the ESLR and our policy recommendations. If you're here on behalf of an organization and you're looking at this and you're like, oh, like we're working on some of this, please feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to kind of partner together so we can, close these gaps, in coalition. The last thing I'll share on our reports, like I mentioned, we just launched a Latina representation in New York government. Hope has been kind of in the process of starting to plant our Hope seeds nationwide. And one of those kind of partnerships that we've built has been in New York. We just hosted our Latina History Day New York event a couple of days ago, which, from what I heard was amazing and really well. And so we also featured some of these findings at that report. Some of these findings from the report at that event. And you can kind of see some of the statistics here. Clearly, there's still a lot that needs to be done to ensure that Latina leaders are represented at kind of every level of government, not just in California, but clearly in New York, there are still some work that needs to be done. And I know Leslie's going to drop the link in the chat in case you're interested on this. But for the sake of time, I'm going to hand it over to Belinda, who's going to talk about 2 upcoming events in case you're able to join us. And then Miss B, I think you're muted.
Of course I'm muted. That's my story. I don't know how else to do this. But anyways, I just want to say thank you, Maria, for that wonderful briefing. It was so clear, so concise, and just so, good information. And then also thank you just for the work that you do to ensure that Latinas' voices are being represented in Sacramento. So a couple things to still keep you engaged and let you know that we're still doing work out in the community regionally. I'm going to start with our Hope Hour. And so this is a series of virtual conversations featuring Latina change makers and thought leaders. And it's really to create, come up with new ideas, build new skills, connect with each other, and engage in thoughtful conversation. And we'll be kicking it off on June 25th at 12 noon with Mike Madrid, who just came out with his book called How America's Largest Minority is Transforming Democracy. And he's the author of the book, and he's gonna talk about the state of Latino electorate and how it's shaping politics and democracy. And then I know Leslie also is gonna put the chat in for that, because there's a series that runs through September with a lot of amazing authors, a lot of amazing thought leaders. So please tune in and check that out. And then lastly, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Latina Empowerment Days. And Latina Empowerment Days are a 1-day workshop that are designed through 8 different uh, regions in California. And it's really to empower Latinas and make sure that you know how to make impact in your community and give you ideas and share with you information that's happening. And each one has a um, financial component to it for financial wealth and health. And the also has a personal development piece to it. And then last but not least, we talk about community issues and what's happening and how to stay involved. Like Maria was talking about policy, there's still things that you can take action on as we travel through this legislative process and make sure that those bills are getting to the governor's desk and that they're getting signed. So we'll kick it off in Bakersfield on July 12th, and then we'll move on to Riverside July 26th, and then we'll have our next one in Fresno on August 9th, and then Downey on August 23rd, Oakland on September 6th, and then San Bernardino September 27th. And then I know Leslie will also drop in the chat where you can find and register for these empowerment days. We're still working on Long Beach and San Diego, and we should have that information updated very soon. But I just want to say thank you to everybody who participated today. Really appreciate that. And I'll turn it back over to Maria.
Awesome. Thank you, Belinda. So with that, that is all we wanted to share with you all today. I want to echo what Belinda was mentioning in terms of just thanking you all for taking some time on a Friday to join us and hear about our work, and also for all of the folks who are a part of our coalitions of support for our bills, or are always supportive of our events and the work that we do. We hope we can continue to count on you all, and please feel free to also reach out to us if there are opportunities that we can continue to partner with you. So with that, I'll open it up in case anyone has any questions. Either you can drop it in the chat or you can unmute yourself. But also just want to say thank you so much for joining us. Stop sharing my screen. Awesome. Great. Thank you, Celine. And yeah, if you don't have any questions, then, we did, I guess, wrap up a little bit earlier. So you can always feel free to reach out afterwards, or reach out to anyone on our team. But just thank you so much for taking some time and for all you all do on behalf of Latinas in California and elsewhere. So thank you so much. Awesome. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop the recording.